Welcome back to Bendy Menopause. I'm Vanessa Weiland, nurse practitioner. I'm the founder of Phases Clinic in Washington State. And today I have with me Maggie Evans, and she's a mental health counselor specifically working with folks who are neurodivergent and going through perimenopause. So, what the perfect guest for folks today from Therapy for Bohemians. And you're also based in Washington State, right?
Yep, I'm in Eastern Washington.
So, tell us a little bit about yourself.
I've been practicing as a therapist for about 15 years. I grew up in this area of Eastern Washington, became a single parent really early on in my career as a mom, and moved back to this area to be close to family about 10 years ago. And opened my private practice during COVID because I needed to be at home with my son
Mm-hmm.
and needed to be available and very flexible for him. I started my practice focusing on working with women at the end of relationships, divorce sometimes, coming out of toxic relationships, and processing just kind of the intersection of being an empath and a highly sensitive woman. That was my
Mm-hmm.
framework at the time. And the intersection of being paired with partners who had more narcissistic traits. So that's what I started out with, which is funny because I had a previous career before I became a therapist as a wedding dress designer and seamstress. And so I was working with women at the beginning of that
Would you ever give them
relationship.
secret warnings like you might want to rethink this?
Yeah, so that was just an interesting sort of trajectory that I've been on. And then when I was 44, I discovered that I have ADHD, and that was a real eye-opener for me. And just like it just felt like a puzzle piece, like finally, clicked into place, and like I could see the whole picture. And that helped a lot to get that diagnosis and get that framework for me to understand the needs that I've always had, but like actually how to prioritize them and create a life that actually really supported me in all my quirky needs.
What clued you in that you might have ADHD, or how did you go about getting that diagnosis?
Yeah, well, I was in private practice and I had a business buddy that I spent a lot of time with. We would do a lot of planning and discussing and problem solving together. And also at the time, I had a boyfriend who suspected he had ADHD. And my son, that was a conversation that my son and I were having too, kind of exploring if that was something that. So it was like in the conversation, I did not think that about myself at all.
Mm-hmm.
But I was really struggling with some cognitive stuff, like thick brain fog,
Yeah.
like short-term memory loss. And it was really impacting my work because I was losing track of the conversations and just spacing out when I was with clients. And I was like, this is not good. And so I went on this business planning weekend retreat with this friend of mine and was talking to her about it. And she has ADHD, and she discovered that she had ADHD because she found out she had narcolepsy. And then the medicine for narcolepsy kind of then helped these other issues that she was having. And
Interesting.
yeah. And so she reflected back to me when I was talking to her about my son. She was like, have you considered that maybe you have ADHD? And I was like,
Uh-huh.
no. And she said, well, what I'm observing of you this weekend points in that direction.
Uh-huh.
So I came home, I met with my doctor, just my primary care, and she gave me a screener and we talked through it, and she started me on some medicine, and it like changed everything. And
Mm.
then just the more research I did and reflection that I did on my life up to that point, it just all made a lot of sense. So that's how I stumbled upon it myself.
Yeah. So something that you've spoken to before is how there can be almost a process of grieving when you have
Mm.
a late diagnosis of ADHD and you have this new lens looking back at your whole life. Can you
Mhm.
speak to that a bit?
Yeah, actually, I made some notes and that made me think of something. Oh, this ties into the perimenopause. So maybe I'll say something about that and then I'll circle back around
Mm-hmm.
if I can remember. So the medicine really helped, and I really started to like make some changes in my life and my schedule, and also just the expectations I had of myself.
Mm-hmm.
I adjusted those. So, like, all that stuff really helped me for a few years after I got that diagnosis. But then I was still struggling with some brain fog, and some other sleep was really difficult. I was just like, what is going on? I thought we got it figured out.
Yeah.
come to find out, I was like deep into perimenopause. And so, what then I came to understand at that point is the emotional dysregulation, the executive dysfunction, and the sensory overwhelm that have always experienced became even more extreme with the introduction or understanding that that was also happening in the perimenopause. And so, even this morning, when I was reviewing my notes and thinking about some of the struggles that I had actually early on as a mother, it would have been really helpful to understand that ADHD was at play.
Hmm.
I could have been a lot more kind and tender towards myself. And so, yeah, there's sadness when I look back on the chaos that I experienced when I was younger, even before I became a mom, but certainly as a young mom. Yeah, like I wish that I would have known and could have made some different choices or just extended myself a lot more grace than I did. I had really high, harsh expectations for myself.
Yeah. And so with that overlap with knowing about ADHD and knowing about relationship conflicts, do you find that there are some themes where ADHD might impact those primary relationships, whether it's spouse or parenting or even friendships?
Oh, sure. I mean, like the emotional dysregulation or disruption. I don't really like that word dysregulation, just like
Hmm.
disruption certainly feels like chaos sometimes.
Hmm.
Can be disruptive, certainly to in a parenting relationship, but also in a partnership.
Hmm.
Coming to understand. I think sometimes when there is that emotional disruption and high sensitivity, if you don't have a partner who really also understands and is compassionate to what's happening, there's not patience and the ability to really slow down and kind of talk through each little piece, one thing at a time. Like each piece really needs its own attention. And what I mean by piece is like tasks and
Hmm.
timing and yeah, just each little piece of having a life together. And I think that's hard when you have a young child, right? Like life just moves so fast and there's so many distractions that if you don't have that awareness, it can just, again, just multiply the chaos.
Yeah, and something I've noticed is that oftentimes in heteronormative relationships, the woman ends up being the executive function for the whole family unit. And it's like literally, despite your best intentions, I have a 4-year-old that we've been at 3 different daycares now, and each one, if there's an issue, they only text me, and I'll
Mhm.
change the text thread and add my husband to it because I'm not even he works from home. I'm not at home a lot of times. So I'm like, talk to him.
Mhm.
And there's so many examples of that where the mom is the default for
Mhm.
keeping the executive function going. So I imagine specifically in perimenopause, where that role becomes even more challenging, the people around you really have to adjust.
And I think it can leave, without awareness and attention and grace, patience towards self, like it can leave a woman feeling so isolated and just like a total failure, right? Because she's worked hard to find ways to compensate and strategize and, kind of figure out ways to keep the household moving. And then when all of that stuff falls away, it's
Hmm.
WTF, what is going
Yeah.
on? And she's going to take it on as her problem.
I'm getting the sense that a lot of what you work on with people is the self-compassion.
And self-trust. And really, like, this is a place that your work and my work overlap is like really turning to the body as a place for trustable information
Mm.
and learning to check in with the body and learning the language of the body. That data collection vessel, let's say, goes with you everywhere. And so we can train it or learn about it and become very attuned to it so that it's a reliable source of information.
Yeah, I get so frustrated in my clinic. I have a lot of patients like you that are diagnosed with ADHD basically because perimenopause strips away their ability to cope. And yet there's so little research on this phenomenon. But, just in the last year or two, there have been more studies looking at this. I think mostly just surveys, but we're finding some really interesting data that not only do more than 90% of people going through perimenopause with ADHD report worse ADHD symptoms, but also it seems to start earlier on average. We're talking, mid to late 30s as opposed to
Mhm.
stereotypically we're thinking mid to late 40s.
Mhm.
So I think it can really throw people through a loop when they're not expecting that.
Yeah, certainly. I think looking back, my symptoms really started to hit hard at 39, but
Hmm.
they were starting before that. And that wasn't on my radar at all.
Right.
At all.
And you can attribute that to so many other things. You've got parenting, your career, COVID, chaos
Mhm.
in the world.
Mhm.
I hear that a lot when people only really recognize when symptoms started in retrospect.
Mhm.
And they're now on the hormones and they're like, this is helping with things that have been bothering me for quite a while.
Mm.
I do want to talk a little bit about the divorce piece because it's such an important area of expertise and something that is coming up often with my patients. And so, how have you noted that the perimenopause or menopause transition might impact relationships? Or, is that a kind of common area for strife?
I mean, I think in general, like you said, perimenopause can just sort of strip away a lot of the coping and strategy that's been put into place. And I think it can reveal deep-seated, issues and patterns and problems in relationship that may have gone unaddressed for a long time. And so that stuff just rises to the surface in a new, a different way. And I also find that this is a time for women where they're just like, they don't have shits to give anymore.
Mm-hmm.
And so they're just like, I'm done. I'm not married, but I certainly feel that in other areas of my life where I'm just like, I don't have the capacity, I don't have the patience, I don't have the tolerance to make excuses for other people anymore. I'm just done. And that oftentimes our own company, being with ourselves alone, is quite delightful and nourishing. And I think all of those pieces kind of coming together can really illuminate, what am I getting out of this
Yeah.
relationship? How do I want to, things need to shift. Can my partner shift along with me? So I just think it's like a veil gets lifted and it doesn't mean that things have to be over, but there's just a lot more that's illuminated that needs to be addressed and looked at and renegotiated. And it's often a choice that the divorce is, the right move.
Yeah, I think you're speaking to an important point that's important to clarify because, you hear a lot of things change in this time because the patience goes down. And I think oftentimes it was the right change. It maybe should have happened 10, 20 years earlier. But I have also heard from patients where their relationship fell apart because they had untreated menopause symptoms. And in retrospect, they're like, overall, it was a pretty good relationship. And I kind of wish I had known and treated my symptoms and been able to work through that. So, do you have any advice for people that feel like actually overall the relationship is worth keeping, but what can they do preventatively to try to like help bring the partner alongside them as they go through this transition?
I think communication is a huge one, right? Even
Hmm.
if they don't know what exactly is going on and what's changing, to just communicate that
Yeah.
instead of trying to fake it until they make it or try to keep up appearances.
Mm-hmm.
It's just like things aren't working the way that they used to. And I'm speaking from the woman's point of view, but like, things aren't working the way they used to. I'm invested in figuring out what's going on and I would like your support.
Hmm.
And so I think it's just that it's not just, but it's communication, certainly,
Hmm.
and having a partner that's willing to adjust. It's like, okay, we're in a new chapter and we have to renegotiate. Things need to change. So if both people can hang in for that, but yeah, I think it's just really important to be honest about what's happening, even just from an experiential sensations in the body, very like basic experience, communicating about that.
Yeah, that's so interesting. I can't quote the study exactly, but there was some study about menopause in the workplace where the women that just try to push through it and then everyone around them is like, why is this person all red and sweaty? Versus the women that are like, I'm sorry, I'm going through a hot flash right now. And a lot of women feel really uncomfortable doing that in the workplace, but actually the women who were more straightforward about what was going on were perceived better.
Mhm.
And not that we should be putting all the onus back on ourselves, but it's just an interesting insight into like
Mhm.
being open and straightforward about like I don't know exactly what's going on, but this is my interpretation of it versus like you say, just trying to like mash that all down and keep fulfilling all the same roles and slowly dying on the inside.
I mean, I think that's why it's so great that this conversation is coming to the surface more and more
Hmm.
because for so long, like women's issues just weren't talked about.
Yeah.
We don't talk about menstruation. We don't talk about menopause. It's the root of a lot of jokes. And so I really appreciate that the conversation is shifting, especially at this time in my life as I'm going through it, right?
Yeah.
So,
Something that I'm seeing more and more in my patients that have late diagnosis of ADHD is also late diagnosed autism or
mhm,
ADHD, and the two do seem to go alongside one another. It's probably not too surprising if you have changes in your nervous system, sensitivity, that a lot of people with autism have sensory differences, but
mhm.
women just seem to be more adept at masking. And so we're having this late diagnosis. And so I'm curious if you're seeing much of that or if that really changes your advice, your recommendations, or even speaking to that relationship piece when someone has the overlap.
That overlap, like I feel less knowledgeable knowledgeable about. Although, come to find out in my own practice, I was treating a lot of women with ADHD or autism or the overlap before I found out that I had ADHD,
Hmm.
which was so interesting to me. So I was seeing so many commonalities. And then when I found out that I had ADHD, I was like, oh, this makes so much sense.
Yeah.
It makes so much sense. At this point in my journey, in terms of my own knowledge, I wouldn't recommend anything different.
Hmm.
I just trust in the wisdom of the body and the sensations and like what actually is happening in a person's experience. That is so trustworthy. And that's how I approach my clients is like, you tell me your worldview and your framework, and I'm going to
Hmm.
work inside of that with you. So I think there are some generalities, but also it's case by case basis how a person is experiencing, those particular sensitivities. And does that answer your question?
Yeah. No, that's interesting. I do hypnotherapy as well, and that's a very common thread that comes up is that self-trust. And we are
Hmm.
taught at some point along the lines that the way we feel doesn't matter, our pain isn't real,
Hmm.
all the gaslighting, all the minimizing. And so people just looking back inward and realizing that that is real and that it matters and that they are deserve to listen to it and prioritize it.
Hmm.
So I think regardless of what medical diagnosis you have, that's always true,
Hmm. Agreed.
especially when we all live in the patriarchy.
Agreed. I've thought of that a couple of times, but I was like, oh, I'm not going to say that. That's opening a big can of worms.
It's just the milieu we're all in, right? It's like
Yeah.
that whole idea of the fish saying like, "How's the water today?" And the other fish is like, "What's water?" They
Hmm.
just don't realize because before we knew science, people could say the same about air. It's like, "What's air?" It's all
Hmm.
around you. You don't even realize it. Are there any general tips that you can give people to help through this transition?
I think it's really important if you're a person who likes alone time to prioritize that. I
Mm.
think that's really solitude and time for reflection, no matter how little it is, I think is really helpful. I find for myself personally and for a lot of my clients that writing things down and writing as a way to process what's going on is really helpful rather than just thinking through it.
Hmm.
I think the other thing that is important for perimenopause in general, but those of us that are neurodivergent, it's like those base self-care pieces are even more important. So sleep, how are you sleeping? How are you eating? Are you getting enough water? How's your movement? Are you moving your body? Those basic, going back to the basics and addressing them if there are pieces missing or disruptions,
Hmm.
because that's the foundation of how we build relationships. We can do our work. We can
Yeah.
think, sophisticatedly. So those I think are always really important pieces to pay close attention to and not write off as like, oh, not a big deal. They are a big deal, super big deal,
Yeah.
especially
I'm with you.
I mean, being a therapist, I'm a huge proponent of therapy and not as a solution focused practice or intervention, but as like this is a time to or an opportunity to do deeper investigation and to have that as a place to really explore what is changing in all the levels, mind, body, spirit, psyche, and reshaping or reinventing a life as needed.
For people who have sensory differences, do you have any advice to help preserve that quiet? Because we can get more easily overwhelmed by loud sounds, bright lights, etc. Too much
Mhm.
sensation, physical sensation.
I mean, if there's a place in the house to get away, put on your headphones, cover yourself
Mhm.
with a weighted blanket, put on your softest socks, comfiest clothes. Taking a bath is another good one. Using a white noise machine or a white noise app, sometimes that's helpful too. And then if there's time and opportunity to get out into nature, out into the woods, sitting at the shore of a lake, like anywhere out in nature that can be quiet, I think is another really supportive piece as well.
Yeah. Yeah. I sometimes tell people, ironically, this is the area that it might make sense to ask for help because maybe the people around you are creating some of that
Yeah.
sensory challenge, and they'd actually probably be more than happy to help if you asked for it. And that's
Mhm.
something I've learned even with my 4-year-old. I can say, I was hoping to have some quiet time on this hike so we could listen to the birds sing. And she's like, okay, they don't take it so seriously. So
Yeah.
sometimes that's one of the hardest things that we have to do is to actually ask for help. We're so used to doing everything on our own, but
Right.
oftentimes that's such a boost to help somebody, and people like helping people.
You have a really good point, Vanessa, and especially for parents to enlist their children in helping with that is such a good modeling also.
Yeah, it
Hmm.
was a relation when I did that, and it worked. So I share that
That's
story.
great.
Well, thank you so much for coming on today, and I want you to let people know how they can find you and work with you.
Yeah, way to find me is on my website at therapyforbohemians.com. I do have openings for one-on-one therapy. I have a writing group that is designed specifically for midlife women, neurodivergent women who are going through midlife. That would be a more
Hmm.
accurate way of saying that. As a place to come and co-regulate, to create, to process, to share, to be in community with each other. So that a new section of that will be opening up in the fall. And then I also have, which might be applicable to some of what we talked today, I have a kind of self-paced course called Decision Making for Neurospicy Women. And it's
Hmm.
very focused on body trust.
Hmm. And that's all at that same website.
Yep. All of that's available on my website.
Love that. Yeah. And that's something that can help people outside of Washington as well.
Absolutely.
Okay. Well, thanks again for coming on.
Oh, Vanessa, thank you for having me.
Bye bye.
Bye.